A lone hiker steps behind a sandstone wall in Canyonlands and freezes. A pale curve pushes through wind-scored sand. Rangers grid the spot. The first brush strokes reveal ribs, then a seated form. 13 years after a young couple vanished. Back at their old case file. A locked van, wallets untouched, prenatal vitamins waiting on a shelf. One coordinate from the grave overlays perfectly with a hand-drawn circle on a secret map. If this wasn't a runaway, who circled that basin? And why was Riley buried inside it? The maze district hid its paths in shadows and stone. By late afternoon, the light fell low and copper across a row of buttes, laying long blades of shade over sand that looked smoothed by a giant hand. A lone hiker stepped behind those buttes for privacy and saw something pale pushing through a thin crust of wind-scored grit. It caught the corner of his eye, small, curved, out of place. He moved closer, annoyed at what he thought was trash. The wind lifted a faint veil of sand and set it down again. The pale curve did not shift like plastic. It held. The shape had texture, a fine porous grain, the slow matte shine of something that had not seen sun in a very long time. The hiker felt his stomach tighten. He knew the difference. Every person who spends time alone out here learns the difference. He took a step back, then another. He kept his eyes on the ground, as if the sand itself might change the story if he looked away, and he called for help. The first ranger arrived in a dust plume that settled over the scene like gauze. Then a second truck. Radios spoke in short, clipped replies. The hiker pointed without walking closer. A yellow cordon went up, humble stakes with tape that snapped in the evening breeze. A clipboard appeared. A GPS unit chirped. One ranger knelt and recorded the coordinate. Another held a compass to note wind direction, because wind is a thief. It changes the scene in minutes and then pretends it was always this way. They did not touch the pale arc. They marked it, a small numbered flag. Another flag along a faint scuff 10 feet off. A track or just the memory of one. The rangers paced the perimeter, eyes down, scanning for anything that repeated. A tread pattern, a dim arc of heel to toe, a fall of pebbles that looked guided by more than gravity. Tire signs on the slick rock fringe were almost gone, more hint than evidence, but they were logged anyway. Everything was logged. Out here, even almost gone could matter. County deputies rolled in as the sun dropped behind the buttes and turned the sky the color of apricots. A boxy white van from the medical examiner eased to a stop with care, as if sound itself might disturb what lay beneath. Floodlights came up, clean white cones that pushed back the early dark and etched the rock in hard lines. The bright light made the pale arc look smaller and more certain at the same time. The senior deputy on scene had worked these canyons for decades. He stood for a long moment inside the tape, hands on his hips, not speaking. His crew waited. Then he spoke softly, almost to the ground. "Grit it," he said. "Treat it as an excavation. This would not be a shovel job. This would be brushes, dittle picks, and vials for whatever the sand gave back." Someone opened the kit and snapped on fresh gloves. Back at the mobile terminal, a dispatcher ran the coordinate against old calls, old files, old worries that never quite died. A name surfaced, and with it the quick, sterile flicker of old case notes. Owen Park, 42, and Riley Park, 37. Last contact 13 years ago. Listed for Canyonlands backcountry, Maze sector. A vanished couple. A tent that had been found neat and zipped. A van locked, as if waiting. No fight. No footprints that sang a clear song. The file had grown cold and heavy and then still. The deputy read the summary without comment. People disappear in the desert for reasons that make sense and for reasons that never will. But the neat campsite from years ago was hard to forget. The crew worked by habit and by hope. Photographs were taken wide, mid, tight, with scale and without. A plastic sheet went down for kneeling, so knees would not print where prints might matter. Every movement was slow, deliberate, respectful. Wind came up and dropped again, fickle. The floodlights hummed. A tech unrolled grid twine and pinned off the patch in tidy squares. Another lifted the first light skin of sand with a soft brush. The pale arc grew to a curve with spacing, like ribs, the suggestion of a cage that once moved with breath. No one spoke for a while. Even experienced hands feel the weight of it when bone returns to air. A ranger walked a slow circle outside the tape, eyes working the dark for any sign of recent camp. Ash, foil, the leaves of a granola bar. Anything a hurried person drops. She found nothing new. The desert kept secrets well until it didn't. At the command table, a younger deputy traced the coordinate onto a tablet map and pulled up attachments tagged to the park's file. There, buried in a 2017 supplemental, the sort of addendum that gets scanned and forgotten, sat a photograph of a custom-printed survey with pencil notes and a heavy hand-drawn circle over a remote basin of the maze. He overlaid the live GPS point with the archived image and watched the crosshair settle. The bright green pin lay inside the old circle. He looked up, throat suddenly dry. The desert had given back a piece, and it was exactly where someone years ago had told them to look. The message landed on Nadia's phone just after dusk. A clean, bright photo streamed in from the desert. Riley Park, 7 months along, sitting cross-legged in front of a terracotta tent. Owen knelt behind her with one arm around her shoulders. The white van was parked a few yards back, square to the horizon like a quiet promise. The caption followed a second later, all set for the night. Canyonlands is beautiful. Love you. Nadia smiled even before she read it. She sent back a line of hearts and the usual reminder. Drink plenty of water, keep the shade up, call by noon tomorrow. It was the agreement they made for peace of mind. Riley had joked about it. I'm pregnant, not fragile, but she'd agreed anyway. The three of them liked plans that were simple and clear. Morning came and ran past the edges of noon. Nadia checked the clock, then the screen. No call. She told herself the same things everyone tells themselves. They slept in. They went for a short hike. The satellite unit was fussy. At 1, she sent a ping text. At 2, she called Riley. Straight to voicemail. She called Owen. Same. She told herself not to panic. At 3:30, she tried again. Voicemail, silence. By 5, sunlight was angling through her blinds in long bars, and the calm reasons had worn thin. She pulled up the last photo and looked at it differently. Riley's easy smile. Owen's easy grip. The tent lines tight and neat. The white van like a safe room in the background. Except now, with the silence pressing in, the safety looked far away. Nadia took a breath, found the Joshua Tree number from a previous family trip, realized the wrong park, and searched again. She called Canyonlands Dispatch. Her voice was steady because she made it be. She explained a pregnant sister, a planned check-in missed, a last photo, a maze district campsite they liked to use when they could get down the rough road. She gave the van's make and color, the plate, their usual gear list, and the fact that they were cautious people who told someone where they were going. The dispatcher asked good questions, typed fast, and said they would send rangers to look. The call ended with a simple instruction. Keep the phone near you. 2 green trucks rolled past the ranger station and into the backcountry while the light was still decent. The maze is slow going. The road asks for patience, even from people who know it well. A third vehicle followed with county deputies, because remote calls can turn into anything. The searchers used what they had, Nadia's description of the last preferred turnoff, the general bearing from the photo, but mostly they used experience. In country like this, familiarity counts. They found the dispersed site near sunset. The scene matched the image almost beat for beat. The white van sat square on a level patch of crusted soil. 30 feet off, the terracotta tent stood zipped and tidy, its guy lines humming a little in the light wind. 2 camp chairs faced a cold fire ring that still held a neat stack of unburned kindling. No ash, no char, no heat. No one had lit anything since the photo. The crew went quiet in the practiced way of people who work scenes more than they talk about them. A ranger called out a time stamp and the coordinate while another stepped the perimeter, eyes on the ground. The wind through black brush made a soft, constant sound like paper being turned somewhere else. Beyond that, there were no voices, no music, no metallic rattle of cookware, nothing that said we're close. They took photographs, wide, then mid, then close, every angle, every item where it sat. They marked tire prints near the road, faint and half erased by gusts. The walking surface between van and tent looked scraped clean by the day's weather. If there had been footprints, they were the kind that existed an hour and then did not. A ranger checked the tent flap without opening it. The zipper pull lay flat, untouched. At the van, a deputy tried the driver's door. Locked. Passenger door, locked. Side slider, locked. He cupped his hands to the glass and looked in without touching anything he didn't have to. Inside, he could see the dim shape of a made bed and the glint of a stainless mug on the tiny counter. No keys left in view. No mess. No note. They gathered in a small, careful huddle beside the hood. The choice on scenes like this is never simple. Forcing entry is fast. It is also a way to smear what matters. Print on the handle, latent dust on the sill, a faint tread on the step. Those things are easy to lose. A locksmith could open it clean, but a locksmith would take time, and time erases edges in the desert. The lead ranger looked from the tent to the van and back again, weighing safety against certainty. She radioed for guidance and for a standby locksmith at first light. The deputies agreed to hold the site overnight. They ran a last slow circle with flashlights, then set a quiet watch under the cooling sky. The desert said nothing back. The camp sat as if paused between moments, everything arranged and waiting. The van was locked, and breaking in could destroy evidence. First light flattened the shadows and turned the rock a soft rose. The locksmith parked outside the tape and carried in a small case, the sort of kit that looks ordinary until it isn't. He worked at the side slider first. Thin tools, patient hands, no force. The tumblers clicked like distant insects. The door eased on its track with a careful metallic sigh, and cool night air slid out of the van as if the vehicle had been holding its breath. No one stepped inside. A ranger photographed the threshold, then the interior, wide mid-tight before anyone touched a thing. The smell was clean and faintly sweet, sunscreen and dry fabric. On the left, a short counter held a stainless mug and a half-full water bottle beaded with overnight chill. Beside it, a bag of trail mix sat clipped shut with a blue chip clip. On a shelf above the counter, a bottle of prenatal vitamins stood like a small, bright flag that changed the room. At the back, the bed was made, fitted sheet tight, top blanket folded once, 2 pillows squared. A ranger pointed with her pen to a small tray by the sink. There side by side lay 2 wallets, 1 leather, 1 canvas, thick with cash and IDs. Next to them, a scuffed backup phone, powered off. The primary phone that sent the last happy photo was not in sight. Keys were not in sight either. They logged each item in order, speaking for the camera as they went. No scuffs on the floor. No overturned drawers. No streaks. No smell of fuel or bleach. The tiny trash bin held a granola wrapper and a paper towel curled like a dry leaf. It looked like 2 people had stepped out and meant to step back in. At the threshold, a deputy crouched and angled a flashlight low across the lip of the slider step. Something ghosted there in the dust, a faint patterned crescent, half a shoe length, not enough to shout, enough to make the eye stay. He didn't touch it. A tech came over with oblique lights and a macro lens. They shot the tread from 3 angles, then used a gel lifter to pull what they could without wiping the shape away. The lift caught a suggestion of lugs and voids, but not the whole story. It went into a rigid sleeve with a label and a time. Outside, the digital forensics unit opened a laptop on the hood of a truck. They pulled the EXIF from the photo Nadia had forwarded, camera model, exposure, and, most important, the timestamp down to the second. They matched it to the satellite send log from the messaging device's account. Uplink start, confirmation ping, delivery. The window lined up exactly with what Nadia had said. The last proof of life had landed when the desert sky was just turning gold. It did not look forged. It looked like the simple truth of a happy night. Search teams moved as soon as the van was sealed again. 2 rangers took the slick rock edges, where a misstep can leave marks that sand cannot hide. Another pair ran a slow sweep through the washes, eyes for drag signs, fresh rockfall, or the odd straight line that does not occur by itself. A rope-trained crew checked the rims of shallow ledges where wind piles grit into soft traps. Midday heat built and then broke without reward. Overhead, a helicopter worked a grid, banks tight and regular, observers leaning on open doors with binoculars. From above, tents, trucks, and footprints resolve into stories against the skin of the land. Today there were only old tire ghosts and new vehicle tracks from the response. No bright colors in the scrub, no distress signals laid in stones, no mirrors flashing from a ridge. The radio stayed mostly quiet. In the afternoon, a deputy hiked a mile down canyon to check a stock tank that sometimes holds water after storms. The mud lip was hard and unmarked. He stood for a minute to listen. Wind moved the black brush again and again, always the same music. He headed back, following his own boot prints to keep the ground clean for tomorrow. By late day, the site looked almost exactly as they had found it, except for the tape and the tripod holes and the little numbered flags that mean a scene has been heard. The van sat where it had been parked, doors shut now, sides reflecting the sky. The inventory list was long and ordinary in a way that hurt. Food, maps, stove, first aid, blankets, the careful clutter of people who had planned a weekend and not a disappearance. Back at the table, the text reviewed the morning's frames. The macro shots of the slider step came up, high contrast under raked light. On screen, the pale crescent looked a little stronger than it had to the naked eye, but still not enough to name. A partial tread, logged and filed, too faint to read then, held in case the future could see more than the present could. The day the numbers came back, the case shifted without anyone raising a voice. A financial crimes detective sat with a spreadsheet and a stack of subpoenas and watched Owen Park's life split in 2 columns. On one side were the accounts everyone knew, a joint checking, a normal credit card, a used van loan with steady payments. On the other side, newly visible only because Warren's pride opened smaller doors, were bridge notes, short-term, high-interest paper held by private LLCs with desert names and P.O. boxes. Balloon clauses, default triggers, the kind of money people take when regular banks start saying no. The totals weren't ruinous on paper, but the timing was. 2 payments had come due the week the Parks drove toward the maze. Collection emails had hardened from friendly reminder to immediate cure required. A lawyer for one lender had sent a final notice at 6:42 p.m. the night before the couple's last photo. A map can be a kind of truth. Sometimes a calendar is too. While those ledgers took shape, a tip slid in on the bolo. A night clerk at a highway station about 120 miles away said a man came in 2 nights after the Parks went quiet. The man matched Owen's general build and beard from the bulletin, close enough to stick in memory. He paid for gas with crumpled bills, bought a prepaid burner phone, and asked for a paper road atlas with a voice that didn't want a conversation. The clerk said the man kept glancing past the glass toward the pumps. He left quickly. The clerk admitted he wasn't 100% sure, but he was sure enough to call. The detail did what such details do. It didn't prove anything. It tilted things. The working theory, which had been a blank worksheet waiting for numbers, began to fill itself out in the simplest lines. A fight in the desert. A husband under pressure. Panic. A hurried concealment. A drive by night toward anonymity, aided by cash, a burner, and paper maps that don't ping towers. The room didn't cheer for the theory. It also didn't fight it. Cases need gravity to move, and gravity favors the obvious. A detective added the sighting to the board. Another put a thin red string between bridge loans and motive, escape. People nodded like they were agreeing with the weather. Nadia did not. She sat with the same printouts in her lap and felt how flimsy they were compared to the solid weight of memory. She could list facts that never made it to a whiteboard. The crib Owen planed and sanded until his fingers turned smooth as the rails. The way he read to Riley's belly at night, low and unembarrassed, like he wanted the baby to learn his voice before the world did. The toolbox he labeled because he said order made hard days easier. None of that erased a debt schedule or a clerk's recollection, but refused to sit in the same sentence as ran. She told anyone who would listen that Riley and Owen were not running people. She said it without drama, as if stating a chemical property. This doesn't react that way. A detective thanked her, wrote family disputes theory in a margin, and the case marched on without that line changing the slope. Time did what time does to Red Rock. Seasons rolled over the canyons in slow layers. Winter light like polished bone, spring winds that sanded edges, summer heat that kept even rangers in the truck at noon. The file that had lived on the corner of a sergeant's desk moved to a drawer and then to a shelf. The bolo stayed active but tired. The helicopter was reassigned to fires. New cases made room by asking for old space. Here and there, someone tugged at a thread. A deputy drove back out to walk the campsite again on a day with different light, because angles sometimes reveal what eyes missed. A lab tech tried a new powder on the partial tread lifted from the van step and got the same almost pattern as before. The backup phone stayed stubborn and clean. The primary phone was still somewhere it couldn't answer from. No cards hit. No IDs flashed. No border camera found a match among millions of frames. If a man was living as a ghost, he was committed to the part. Nadia kept calling the detective once a month, always polite, always precise. Anything new? Not yet. She kept the last photo in the kitchen and learned to look at it without flinching. Grief settled into a shape that let her work and sleep and still notice the way evening light bends around glass. Then a small thing, exactly the kind of small thing that starts the next chapter, arrived by mail rather than radio. In the county inbox sat a form letter with boxed fields and a barcode. Notice of storage fees, it read across the top. Vehicle, white cargo van. Status, unclaimed. Outstanding balance, itemized. Before release or auction, policy required a final inventory. Someone set the letter on the sergeant's desk. Someone else said, "Isn't that the Parks van?" The shelf got a little lighter that afternoon. 6 years had scraped the shine off everything in the impound lot. Sun sat on roofs. Dust-filmed windshields, tag strings faded to pale pink. The white van waited in a back row. Chalk on the window marking dates no one remembered writing. A young deputy with a clipboard and fresh gloves followed the fee notice to the VIN, read it twice, and opened the door with the evidence key like he was waking a room. The reinventory form asked for simple things, count, condition, location, but habit made him look for things the form did not. He moved slow, photographing each angle, calling out items for the body cam. Stove, blankets, first aid kit, utensils, maps. The interior still held the calm of people who plan weekends, not goodbyes. He checked the overhead cabinets last, running a knuckle along each face out of nothing more than curiosity. On the second panel to the right, the sound changed. The thunk went hollow, not solid. He tapped again, softer. Hollow. The seam between two vertical faces looked too perfect. No tiny gap of hand-built wood, just a hairline like a pencil mark. He pressed with the pad of his thumb and felt the panel give a fraction and then hold. He set the clipboard down, took a very small flat tool from his pocket kit, and slid it along the edge the way cabinet makers do when they suspect a trick. A hidden magnetic latch released with a shy click. The panel hinged out. Behind it was a dark rectangle big enough for a shoebox. He did not reach in. He photographed the opening from 3 angles and called for a second set of eyes. When another deputy arrived, They logged the time, pulled a fresh paper bag, and reached in with gloved fingers as careful as if they were lifting a bird. The object was a sealed waterproof tube, gray, with screw cap ends and a faded manufacturer's label, the kind surveyors use when they don't want rain to change a plan. The cap showed a ring of thread seal and a smear of silicone. Someone had meant for air not to get in and secrets not to get out. The young deputy set the tube on a clean sheet and wrote the number on both the tube and the bag in neat block letters. Chain of custody moved the tube from van to desk to evidence room, where the opening would happen under lights that flatten shadows and with a camera that doesn't blink. A supervisor signed. The cap broke free with the tacky sound of silicone letting go, and the inside gave a dry whisper as the contents slid out. Not one map, many. Rolled custom geological printouts, heavy paper with crisp grid ticks, each sheet a patchwork of USGS-based layers overlaid with contours and shading from another source. Across them ran pencil notes, small and tidy, the script of someone who writes more numbers than words. Strike 0.45 degree, dip 12 degrees, float and wash. Carnotite staining near bend. Monazite possible in heavy sands. V-count high on shelf. The deputy leaned in. He did not know geology beyond the words that sounded like stone themselves, but he knew patterns of attention. Someone had walked the maze district not as a tourist, but as a student, marking seams, washes, and ledges with the patience of a person who expects the ground to pay out if asked the right way. The notes fixed on a remote sector with few ways in and fewer ways out. A basin tucked behind a maze of buttes where trails are more rumor than route. On one sheet, a large hand-drawn circle enclosed that basin. The pencil line had gone around twice, the second past darker, as if the hand had decided certainty feels better when it looks certain. Inside the circle, arrows pointed to yellow crust, black sand-heavy, gamma plus, and a small X beside a coordinate that matched the style of the park's old file. Someone years earlier had drawn a target around a piece of country most people never see. The room's talk shifted from past tense to future tense with the maps in hand. A ranger traced the access route with a capped pen, 2 hours if the road was kind, longer if recent weather had done what weather does. A plan formed the way plans do. Small team, light kit, early start, eyes for pits and benches, radios checked twice. If the circle meant anything, they wanted to be standing inside it before the sun read 9. They left in the blue-white wash of morning and made the long, slow miles into the basin, parking before the last rough ledge and walking the rest to keep the ground clean. The maps were clipped to boards and held against the wind with bulldog clips. The team moved like people who have learned not to trust distances in the maze. What looks near takes an hour. Inside the hand-drawn circle, the rock was as the paper promised. Sandy shelves, dark streaks in the bends where heavy grains settle, crusts on stone that looked, to a trained eye, more than just iron. They scanned for camp evidence, tool marks, fresh cuts, the unnatural order of stacked stones that aren't wind's work. They found nothing that made a clear sentence. No gear cached, no recent dig, no flag tucked under a rock, no scatter that told a story. A small pit near a juniper turned out to be the dry mouth of an animal den. A yellow stain on a ledge flaked under a fingernail into nothing useful. By late afternoon, the basin had given them dust and sun and the kind of silence that makes people watch their own thoughts. The rangers photographed the general scene, shot the coordinate of the place the pencil liked best, and walked back out, leaving only their prints and the faint line of a clipboard edge where it rested on stone. Back at the desk, the deputy slid the maps into a fresh evidence bag, pressed the seal, and signed the line. The circle had pointed like a compass, and the day had pointed back at them with an empty hand. The clue did not break the case. It went back in a bag. They took the tube maps to a geology department where sandstone dust lived in the carpet and rock cores lined the halls like old books. A lecturer with canyon country hands and a sun line across his forehead laid the sheets flat and let quiet do the first pass. His eyes moved the way a prospector's do, pattern first, meaning second. "These aren't tourist scribbles," he said at last. "Serious amateur." He tapped pencil marks that marched across the paper in tidy, practical script. "See this? Strike, dip. That's how beds tilt in space. Here he's marking float, loose fragments carried by water, heavier grains laying out in the bends. And here he's circling a possible pay layer." He smiled without warmth. Hope dressed up as data. The prints themselves were a hybrid. USGS base layers faint beneath fresh contours and shading from another source. Whoever made them had blended public maps with field observations and maybe some home software. Cheap, but capable. The lecturer followed a hand-drawn circle with his finger. "If this is right," he said, "someone walked this basin more than once and thought the ground might be worth more than scenery." The detectives asked about the words scattered across the margins. "Carnotite, monazite." The lecturer gave them the short version. Carnotite, yellow crusts rich in vanadium and uranium, found in country like this when the chemistry lines up. Monazite, a dense sand grain that hides rare earths. It sinks to the bottom where water slows. Neither was proof of anything criminal. Both could make men stare at dirt like it might change their lives. Where had the prints come from? The footer held a tiny logo and an address from a small-town print shop 2 counties away. It looked like the kind of place that knocks out wedding programs and blueprints in the same afternoon. A detective called the number and got a recorded voice that had not been updated in a long time. They drove there anyway. The building was empty. Paper sun-faded in the windows, a dust line where shelves had been, a curled inspection sticker from a year that already felt old. The neighbors remembered the owner leaving after a slow season, heading to Oregon to help family. The records? He took what mattered. A barber next door said, sweeping hair that would not sit still. The rest went in a dumpster. If an order file ever held a name that tied the maps to a person, it was now landfill lore. Maps in hand, they did the obvious thing. They went back into the circle. The team planned for 3 days. The maze doesn't reward speed, so they measured their work by grid squares and water bottles. They set out at first light, clipped the prints to boards, and walked the basin until the sky went blank with heat. The first day gave them geology that matched the pages. Stained ledges where a person with the right kind of hunger would slow down, black heavy sands in the insides of bends, the odd varnished crust that might have been anything or everything. They flagged spots, shot coordinates, photographed textures, and kept moving. No remains, no tools, no gear half buried by a hurried hand. They found a tin can polished to a coin by wind and time, a boot heel from a decade that made the deputy who found it laugh, and a shallow pit that turned out to be nothing more than a place where a coyote had considered ambition. The second day, they worked higher, along shelves that break ankles, peering under boulders for unnatural order. 3 stones stacked just so, the faint square shadow of something once cached. A ranger knelt and ran fingers over a scrape that might have been the mouth of an old test pit, then stood and shook her head. The desert loves to make accidents look like intention. The third day, they gave to patience. They pushed a line through thorn and heat shimmer, paused at shade that wasn't, and listened for the sound of fly or bird that can pull eyes to what matters. The only rhythm was wind slipping through black brush and the soft click of radio checks. By afternoon, the circle had said all it was going to say. The crew walked out chalked with dust and sunburn, carrying nothing that would move a judge or a heart. Back at the office, the board stayed as it was. The fugitive husband's story did not win new evidence. It survived by habit, the way a river keeps the channel it has already cut. The clerk's sightings still pressed down one corner. The bridge loans still hung like weights from the name Owen Park. People stared at the maps, then at the empty parts of the board, then back at the maps, as if repetition might make a line appear. In the lab, a technician cleaned out a tray that had not seen daylight since the first week, when the van had given up only ordinary things. A small envelope lay at the back with a date and a number, almost shy. He opened it and poured out the fine sweepings from the van's carpet. Rind of grit, threads of lint, and a pinch of something faintly yellow that caught the light. Under low magnification, he logged its color, its grain, its refusal to declare itself. He made a line in the system, checked a box no one likes to check, and slid the envelope back into its sleeve. Inconclusive, the tag said, and then the light went off. They came back to the place the hiker had pointed out, only now with a plan built square by square. Twine stretched into a neat grid over a shallow depression. Stakes held the corners. Flags marked the edges. The lead forensic anthropologist spoke little and set the pace with her hands. This would be an excavation, not a dig. Nothing rushed. Nothing guessed. Photographs first, wide, mid, tight. Then notes. Wind direction, surface crust, the way small stones had settled in a faint arc, as if poured and patted by time. When the camera stopped clicking, brushes started whispering. The first layer of wind-packed sand came off like talc. A tech eased it into labeled trays with a painter's knife. The next layer was a shade darker, streaked with tiny threads of root. Dental picks traced the line where sand met something that was not sand. The curve that the hiker had seen grew into a clear pattern, ribs, spaced and regular. Sand lifted from the sternum, the clavicles, the bowl of the shoulders. The skeleton sat seated, knees drawn, as if the body had been lowered into the hollow and folded. The arms came up one by one as the team freed them. There were bits of fabric clinging to the upper arms like ash-gray silk. No shoe leather. No metal fasteners in the first pass. The desert had done its dry work and kept what it could. They paused to reset the lights. The floodlights made the bones look both fragile and stubborn. A photographer leaned in and recorded each unit of the spine as it emerged. The anthropologist asked for a finer brush and cleared sand from the pelvis, careful, grain by grain. Then her hand stopped. Within the protective cradle of the pelvis lay a second pattern of bone, at a scale that made everyone on the line breathe in and hold it. A tiny skull cap, no bigger than the heel of a hand. A faint rib cage with the lines so close together they seemed drawn with a pencil. Thread-thin long bones crossed like twigs. The anthropologist did not move for a full count of 10. Then she looked up and nodded once. The note-taker wrote 2 words that changed the file: fetal remains. Everything slowed even more. New flags. New photos. The grid square count expanded by 2 on each side, and the tools shrank. The sight quieted to the sounds of brush on sand and pen on paper. The deputies stepped back without being told. Even the wind seemed to step back. There are moments that move a case from one box to another. This was one of them. The file that had lived for 13 years under missing shifted to homicide with the weight of a pen stroke. Bodies don't bury themselves, and no hiking fall tucks a woman into the ground seated with her unborn child still inside the circle of her bones. Someone had chosen this hollow, lowered her in, and sealed the story until the desert loosened its grip. They measured depth to the first bone, depth to the last. They noted the compaction, the color changes in the soil. No burrowing insect activity in the core. No clear animal gnaw on exposed edges. A small crescent of rodent marking on one metacarpal, old and minor, post-burial. The rest was a human plan carried out in a human way. At the command table, a younger deputy pushed a pin into a digital map, current gravesite coordinate. Then he pulled up the scans of the custom prints found in the van's hidden tube, the ones with tidy pencil notes and that heavy hand-drawn circle around a remote basin. He overlaid the live point on the old paper image and let the software snap them together. The green crosshair settled inside the circle. No one spoke for breath. The coincidence felt too clean to be chance. Years ago, someone had circled this patch of country like a target. Today, Riley lay buried within that line. The printouts were not just a hobby record. They were a map of intent. A ranger walked the perimeter, scanning for any leftover sign. A tool scratch on stone, the right-angle shadow of a cache tarp, a straight stick that wind would not make. The site gave up nothing fresh. The desert had held the grave until an animal, rooting for a meal, loosened the top and let the first rib say hello. The anthropologist lifted the remains in stages, each bundle cradled in foam and bagged with its own sheet of notes. Soil from inside the pelvic bowl went into separate vials. So did tiny crumbs of yellow crust collected from the back of the sacrum, where sand had stained bone. Chain of custody tags stacked like tickets at a counter. Each item got its own number and its own line. Back at the trucks, the deputies updated the board. The story they had carried in, the old theory of a fight, a panic, a man driving into the dark, no longer fit what the ground had said. The burial was deliberate. The location was specific. The map from a hidden tube had known about this place before anyone else did. That meant knowledge. That meant planning. That meant more than one person's fear. Evening slipped down the canyon walls. The grid string came up. The last photographs captured the clean outline of the pit, then the blank rectangle of sand after it was filled. They would return for wider searches, but the day's answer was already written. Riley Park had been found, and she had not been alone. The question that followed was the kind that hardens a case. If the circle was a destination, who else knew it? And why was Riley buried there? The medical examiner's office had no soft tissue to question, so the answers would have to live in surfaces, in the tiny places where the world leaves fingerprints you can't see. The lab wheeled in the scanning electron microscope and made the room feel smaller. Under its lens, bone is not smooth. It is a honeycomb, a field of pits and ridges where dust can settle and stay for years. They started with the neck vertebrae. A technician lifted a pinhead scrape from the anterior surface of C3 and C4 and set it on a stub with carbon tape. The chamber sealed. The vacuum dropped to silence. On the monitor, gray shapes resolved into a landscape of pores. In those pores, the first bright grains appeared. Ultrafine particles clustered like pollen. An element scan colored the points by what they were. The map lit up for vanadium and uranium, a pair that travels together in the mineral carnotite. The lab lead asked for ratios. Numbers came back and were written in a narrow hand along the margin of the worksheet. The vanadium to uranium ratio wasn't just a vague match to carnotite. It lined up with values the state survey had logged for a handful of outcrops in one May subbasin, the same subbasin inside the hand-drawn circle from the hidden maps. They checked controls. A clean bone sample from the archive showed nothing. A soil sample taken a meter from the grave, bagged the same day, had a different pattern. More silica, more iron, almost no vanadium signal at all. They tested the paper bags used at the scene and the plastic sleeves used at intake. No signal. They swabbed the lab bench, the forceps, the carbon tape. Clean. Then they did what cautious people do. They sampled deeper. From the interior pores of the vertebrae, places simple handling can't reach, they lifted a second set of grains. Same result. Same ratio. If dust had gotten on the neck after burial or during transport, it would sit on the outside. These grains were embedded. They belonged to the last hours, not the next 13 years. The lab moved through the rest of the axial bones, logging each finding with the same slow care. Not every spot carried the bright pair, but the neck did more than once, as if a hand or cloth that had touched or dust had also touched skin, and the skin had carried that trace to the bone as time took everything else away. Someone remembered the old van carpet sweepings boxed in a tray and tagged years ago as inconclusive. The file number was fetched. The envelope crackled like dry leaves. Back then, the lab had had a loop and a light. Now it had a better way. They split the sweepings, used a tape lift to pull fine particles, and ran those through the same SEM routine. The first pass found lint and quartz grit. The second found 3 micrograins that glowed like the ones from the vertebrae. Element map, ratio match. The dust from the van and the dust locked into Riley's neck told the same story in the same accent. The maze subbasins circled on the prints. They ran the numbers one more time, because that is what you do when the air in the room starts to feel thin. The results didn't move. The lead wrote a one-line conclusion that fit on a single page. Trace carnotite particles, paramatum, consistent with contact in maze subbasin sector marked on recovered maps. Site contamination and packaging transfer excluded by controls. The effect on the case was immediate. The simple picture, fight, panic, flight, no longer sat straight. A fight does not put or dust with a specific V. Use signature inside the pores of a woman's neck bones. A random wander does not plant a body inside a circle basin that someone had been mapping for value. The board in the squad room changed without anyone announcing it. The red yarn that had run from bridge loans to motive, escape loosened. A new strand stretched from maps to money. The detectives wrote it in plain language so no one could pretend not to see it. This is not a domestic blow-up. This is a resource crime orbit, money in the ground, and someone ready to protect it. From there, the question sharpened. Who walked that basin with a notebook and a Geiger counter? Who had reason to silence a man who knew where the yellow crusts were thickest? Who could fake a fugitive trail with a burner phone and a road atlas 2 days later? They widened the net in the places paper remembers better than people do. Corporate filings from a year before the parks vanished. UCC liens and loan assignments tied to the bridge notes. Old email headers from a dissolved consulting partnership. A name kept surfacing where stress and money touched each other. A name that had sat on a shelf too long because the easy theory had been loud. When they pulled the phone dumps again, this time looking back a month instead of a week, this time asking for historical tower hits near the maze access roads. The line that mattered didn't point to a stranger at all. It pointed to Owen's ex-business partner. The name that kept surfacing on liens, emails, and loan assignments led far from the desert, to a tidy hardware and feed store on a sunlit street in Central Oregon. The sign over the door read Kerr Supply. Inside, the place smelled like cut lumber and coil fertilizer. A bell rang when the detectives walked in. Behind the counter stood Elias Kerr, thicker now than in old photos, gray at the temples, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked like the sort of man who could fix a fence and balance a ledger on the same morning. He knew why they were there as soon as badges flashed. Still, he gave a professional smile and the slow, patient nod of a man who has already practiced his answers. "Of course," he said, "if it helps you clear the record." He locked the register, told a clerk to cover the floor, and agreed to meet at the small police station down the road. He walked out without hurry, as if this were just another item on a list. While Kerr drove, the case team built his profile on a whiteboard. Old credit card statements showed subscriptions not to golf or wine clubs, but to geology journals, niche titles that traded in or bodies in the same math. There were receipts for rock tumblers, gamma detectors, heavy mineral pans, and a portable Geiger counter. There were software charges for mapping tools, the cheap kind used by serious hobbyists who want to make pro maps without pro budgets. None of this was a crime. All of it said the same thing. Elias Kerr thought like a prospector. The business split with Owen had not been clean. Emails from the final month were cold and tight. Kerr's lawyer had pressed hard on the notes that later became bridge loans, filing UCC liens that turned short-term help into a choke. The last letter before the trip demanded cure without delay, and it carried Kerr's CC at the bottom like a shadow. Debt pressure had a face now, and it was not a stranger's. Kerr sat in the interview room with his hands flat on the table, posture relaxed, gaze steady. He answered basics. How long he and Owen had worked together, when they stopped, who kept what. He used neutral words that took the heat out of sharp facts. Like a divorce, he said once. Unpleasant, but ordinary. He said he had been shocked by the disappearance, and then saddened to learn about Riley. His voice was even. He asked for water and thanked the detective who brought it. The detectives did not argue. They showed. First, the maps from the van's hidden tube, spread on the table in a neat fan. These aren't tourist prints, a detective said. They read like field work. Your field. Kerr looked down with polite interest and a small shrug. Owen went through phases, he said. Gold panning. Meteorites. If he printed these, it would fit. He pushed the pages back a half-inch with 2 fingers, as if returning a menu. Next, they showed phone records that put a handset registered to Kerr's business in range of the maze access roads twice in the month before the parks vanished. Tower hits near Hans Flat. Kerr glanced at the summary and said he rented a unit to a friend sometimes. He did not remember which weekends. He kept his tone mild. The friend's name, when asked, did not come quickly. The detectives moved to purchases. They slid across invoices for Orisay kits, for mapping paper from a now-closed print shop, and for a pair of field boots ordered the month before the trip. Boots with a distinct outsole pattern built for slick rock and mine benches. Kerr nodded. A hike, he said. I like good gear. He smiled a little, as if to say this was normal. Then came the old van photos, reworked with modern tools. The lab had pulled new detail from the macro frame shot at the slider step. Under enhanced oblique light, the faint crescent became a lattice of lugs and sipes. Not a full print, but enough to count. A detective laid a transparent overlay of the outsole from Kerr's boot purchase on top of the image. The angles of the chevrons and the spacing of the center bar lined up. Not courtroom perfect, strong enough to make the room feel closer. Kerr leaned in, studying the overlay like a man who respects a careful job. Lots of boots look like that, he said. You know that. He did not touch the page. The line of his jaw was tighter now, the easy curve gone. They asked about the print shop whose logo sat in the corner of the maps. He said he did not recall where Owen printed anything. They asked if he had ever walked the circle basin in the maze. He said he hiked in the Southwest years back, but not there, not that he remembered, and certainly not with Owen. He kept bringing the talk back to the business, where he sounded competent and reasonable. Money troubles happen. People part. It had nothing to do, he said, with what happened later. The interview paused. Outside the room, a detective clicked through the last of the SCM reports and the van carpet retest. He saw the V/U ratio that tied bone dust to the circled subbasin and the 3 micrograins from the carpet that matched it. He checked the chain of custody signatures twice. He closed the folder and walked to the door. Back inside, the air felt held. Kerr sat very still, like a man who knows the next page might not be one he wants to read. The handle turned. The door opened. An officer stepped in and set a sealed materials envelope on the table between them. The room held still when the envelope opened. A detective read from the lab sheet without lifting his eyes. Bone dust taken from Riley's neck and micro traces lifted from the van's carpet carried the same carnotite signature. The same vanadium-to-rhenium ratio logged in the maze subbasin inside the hand-drawn circle. The numbers were plain. The chain of custody was clean. Next came the photos. On the left, the enhanced tread from the van's slider step. Chevrons and center bar pulled out by oblique light until the pattern spoke. On the right, the outsole diagram from Kerr's boot invoice. Angles, spacing, the small notch near the heel bar. Not a full impression, but the kind of alignment that makes doubt feel thin. Elias Kerr had practiced calm. It slipped. Contamination, he said. Dust from the site, transfer in the bagging. You know how this goes. His voice was even, but something tightened in his jaw. The room did not argue. Silence let the paper do its work. The detective turned the report so it faced him. Controls ruled out contamination, he said. Interior pores, Elias. That dust was there when she died. He tapped the map overlay, and she was buried inside the circle U where your partner drew. Kerr looked at the tread photo again, longer this time, as if willing it to become something else. When it didn't, he exhaled through his nose, slow and loud in the quiet room. His hands flattened on the table. He stared at the wood grain in front of him and spoke to that, not to anyone. He wasn't supposed to bring her. The words came out flat, then gathered speed. He told it like a list he had carried in his head for 13 years. The meeting was his idea, not a friendly one. He had work in that basin, illegal prospecting, and Owen had finally understood what the maps really were. Owen had said he would go to the park and to the feds if it didn't stop. Kerr had driven down to the maze to end the argument where no one else would hear it. They argued beside the van. Owen would not bend. Kerr had a rock hammer in his pack, the heavy kind with a square face. He said he swung because anger rose faster than reason. One blow. Owen went down in the dust and did not get up. When Kerr turned, Riley was there, hands to her mouth, eyes on the ground where her husband lay. She saw everything, he said, and for a moment his voice frayed. He talked about panic becoming a plan. He lowered Riley into a shallow pit he had already started as a test cut for the ore. He sat her body in the hollow and pulled sand over bone with his hands until the wind could finish the rest. He said he felt the baby move under his palm once as he worked and had to stand away to breathe. Then he came back and kept going. He moved Owen later, after dark, to an abandoned shaft he knew from an old claim map. It was deep and narrow and dangerous to climb. He said he dropped a stone and never heard it hit. He dragged Owen there by himself. He said it took hours. The gas station 2 nights later was part of the same plan. He drove far enough to be seen by someone who would remember the wrong story. He bought a burner phone and a road atlas on purpose. He wanted the board to read fugitive. He said it worked longer than he expected. No one asked why he had not spoken sooner. They asked for directions. He took a pencil and marked a rim near a stand of juniper, then drew a thin line to a dot with a small X where the shaft broke the surface. He said the collar timber was rotten years ago. He assumed it was worse now. He warned them to keep back from the edge. He kept his eyes on the paper, not on the faces watching him. A recovery in that country means risk you plan around. The team brought in drones from a university lab, small, tough, with bright lights and quiet rotors. They flew the first unit down the shaft Kerr had marked. The camera showed raw rock, old cribbing, and finally a tangle of collapsed timber and debris. Below that, a shape no one mistook for anything else. The second drone confirmed it from another angle. They logged the depth and called a rope crew. Hauling Owen's remains up through the narrow throat took the rest of the day. The man at the controls moved like a surgeon. The shaft gave backbone and cloth in careful stages until the last bundle cleared the lip and the wind met him again. Dental records closed that part of the file. The rest moved in straight lines. Charges were filed, 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial was long on documents and short on drama. The maps, the ear dust, the tread, the phone hits near Hans Flat, the confession recorded and transcribed. The jury didn't take long. Life without parole. When the papers were done and the boxes were shelved, Nadia drove to the overlook where the wind moves through grass like water. She placed a small crib toy, wooden, smooth from worry, on a flat stone and rested her fingers there. She did not speak for a while. Then she said only what the desert would allow and what the case could finally hold. We know now, if a single dusty clue can rewrite 13 years, imagine the case is still waiting. Subscribe to Alibi Stories and turn on the bell. Drop your theory in the comments. What did we miss? Then continue with our Vanish Files playlist and follow the trail to the next crack in the alibi.